long-term water needs are going to be, and drilling down into that information in each of these watershed planning region reports. Next. Statewide level, before I get into the policy recommendations, which is the fun part, let's look at the data. So we have long-term demand projections statewide broken out by the major water user groups that have the water use has always been classified into. You can see, you know, we're projected to have roughly a steady population growth of about a third more population 50 years from now than we will have today, and almost directly proportional to that, about a third growth in water demand across the state of Oklahoma. And you can see how that breaks out. Crop irrigation is and will continue to be the largest water use sector in the state of Oklahoma on that trend, followed by municipal and industrial water use. So those kind of public water supply systems, their residential and industrial customers, that sort of thing. Next. We can also look 50 years from now, what do those water demand sectors look like? Again, crop irrigation, the largest, followed by municipal and industrial. Third largest, thermal electric power generation. So a lot of coal, gas-fired plants, those use a significant amount of water. We expect to see their demand continue to be huge. It's interesting, you know, there's huge growth in the oil and gas industry in our state right now, especially with the advent of fracking. And we hear about the huge amount of water that fracking uses in our state. And it's true, it uses a lot more water than conventional drilling uses. But as a whole, the oil and gas sector's less than 10% of the overall water use in the state of Oklahoma. The big ones are still crop irrigation and municipal industrial use. And this is looking 50 years from now, what percentage of water, oil and gas will be using relative to those other sectors. Next. We can look at the growth areas. Where do we expect to see the biggest growth? Interestingly, 50 years from now, or over the course of the next 50 years, we expect thermal electric power generation to be the sector that experiences the greatest growth in water demand, 31%. Municipal and industrial, 28%, irrigation, 25%, oil and gas, 12% growth in water use in that sector. That's because of the growth in the industry and the additional water use fueled by fracking technology. It's also interesting to look at how this breaks out by each of the 13 planning regions. So you can see Eufaula here, overall water use 50 years from now, and how that breaks out. Mostly municipal and industrial water use, some oil and gas definitely shows up in that segment as well. But you can see a lot of folks think the Oklahoma City area is the biggest water use region of the state, but it is not. It is actually the Panhandle region because of the crop irrigation use, water use out in that area. Those three Panhandle counties are 3 of the 5 top ag-producing counties in the United States, and it's because they have that Ogallala aquifer resource under them to fuel that growth. If you look at each of these regional planning watershed reports, you can also see a very fine amount of detail looking at monthly water demands broken out by monthly. You can see crop irrigation spiking in the summer in this particular basin, not too surprising, some of the other water uses. So this is just to point out the fact that there's a great level of detail in those watershed planning region reports that are available on our website or in hard copy. So let's get to the policy issues, the fun stuff. This, of course, started and ended with public input and feedback from the public on the issues that kind of rose up through that public input process. What gets folks excited? What do we need to focus on? What are the big issues out there when it comes to water policy and management? This is a smattering of those. Looking at all of those recommendations that really came through that public input process, my board opted to prioritize and focus on what are the ones that really deserve attention today, that are most urgent, what could possibly address the big water concerns, shortages, that sort of thing in the future, that we need the legislature, the governor, this agency and other agencies to really focus on today. And we came up with, the board came up with the big 8, we call them priority recommendations out of those 20 to 30 recommendations that are still included in the comprehensive water plan. So these 8, I'll go through those real quick, include water project and infrastructure financing. This is where question 764 comes into play. We have at the Water Resources Board since 1985, we have managed a drinking water and sewer infrastructure financing program that started with a vote of the people to amend the Constitution to create this program. Legislature appropriated $25 million to go in cash reserves to fuel revenue bonds to provide this financing to cities, towns, rural water districts across the state of Oklahoma. In the 25 plus years that we have managed that program, we've built it into a AAA rated program, which is a higher credit rating than the state of Oklahoma has. And we have since that time financed $2.7 billion worth of drinking water and sewer infrastructure across the state. That is roughly 2/3 of the drinking water sewer infrastructure that has gone in across the state of Oklahoma has gotten its financing through the Water Resources Board's Financial Assistance Program. That said, looking out at the next 50 years of drinking water, sewer infrastructure needs out there in the rural water districts, the towns, communities, cities across Oklahoma, the forecast is over $82 billion worth of need over the next 50 years. As great as our program is, it's limited by the amount of cash that we have in reserve. You can't just go out and sell bonds without having some collateral or some money in the bank to help back those loans, essentially. That's just common sense, and you especially can't maintain a AAA credit rating out there. And we don't just have a AAA credit rating as a badge of honor for the Water Resources Board. What that translates into is the lowest cost financing you can get. The higher your credit rating, the lower the interest rate. So we can provide AAA rated interest rates to cities like Eufaula that they probably could, in fact they couldn't because they don't have that high credit rating, couldn't go out and get on their own. Nobody in the state of Oklahoma can get that kind of credit rating except for the Oklahoma City Public Utilities, Public Water Utility Trust. They're the only other ones. Them, Sam Noble Foundation, and the Water Resources Board are the only 3 AAA rated credits in the state of Oklahoma. Looking out at that next 50 years of need, though, we're going to quickly go from providing 2/3 of the financing for those projects to between 6 to 9%. And this just looks at the drinking water infrastructure need and our ability to finance that need over the next 50 years. So you can see we're quickly going to be not the major provider of financing out there, but the minor one, which means most cities, towns, rural water districts are going to be on their own to figure out how to repair, upgrade, expand their infrastructure without the AAA credit rating and assistance of the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. This shows since program inception where we have done grants in the orange dots and loans in the yellow dots across the state. You can see all 77 counties have been touched by this. Eufaula has received financing from us because of that that high credit rating. We have saved folks over $900 million in avoided interest costs that they would have paid on their own if they had to go out and get their own financing. That translates into cheaper rates for everybody, simply said. The state question proposes to ask the voters of Oklahoma to approve essentially a pledge of credit of up to $300 million of the state of Oklahoma. So instead of asking the legislature to appropriate $300 million cash, put in the bank for reserves, which might translate into tax increases, certainly would take money away from other critical valuable projects, and instead of asking the legislature to do a general obligation bond, which was a popular topic this session as your representatives know, whether we're talking about Indian Cultural Center or even trying to fix the Capitol, general obligation bonds were not a popular topic. This is a creative way, we think, to essentially say that the state of Oklahoma will kind of co-sign the notes. When we do loans to cities, towns, rural water districts out there, they will back those loans. In the over 25 years that we've been doing this, we have never had to come to the legislature for a bailout. We have built it into a AAA credit rated program, not because we make junk loans, payday loans, if you will, but we make solid, high quality loans. So the likelihood that any taxpayer, legislature, anybody would have to pay 1 cent to fulfill that obligation is essentially zero. And yet having just that pledge of credit, the pledge of the state to back those loans, allows us to go out and leverage the financing we need to meet that $82 billion of projected need over the next 50 years. So creative solution that we think won't cost taxpayers 1 red cent. So, and in fact will translate into continuing to keep those water sewer rates as low as we can. Water for 2060 Act. Another one of the 8 priority recommendations that got implemented this legislative session: conservation, efficiency, recycling, and reuse. In other words, let's not just try to meet that 1/3 growth in demand in the next 50 years by trying to pipe more groundwater and lake water to wherever that need is. Let's focus on trying to use water more efficiently, conserve water as much as we can, reuse and recycle water as much as we can. States that are much more arid than us, including Arizona, Nevada, El Paso, Las Vegas, they're great examples of areas because they had stretched their freshwater supplies so thin and really didn't have any other options. They got really creative and aggressive about doing things like reusing their wastewater, using that for irrigation instead of fresh drinking water for irrigation, lawns, for example, that sort of thing. And so the Water for 2060 Act, which the New York Times called one of the most aggressive water conservation goals they've seen anywhere in the nation. In fact, they tongue-in-cheek called it a sort of a double take. Look what Oklahoma did, not known for its environmental progressive actions. We passed this Water for 2060 Act, which sets a goal of consuming no more fresh water in 2060 than we consume today as a state. It's a goal, not a mandate. We don't like mandates in Oklahoma or a lot of other states around us, but a goal, and it creates an advisory council, which is beginning to be put together right now by the Speaker Pro Tem and Governor, to get around the table and figure out how we're going to meet that goal. What can we do to better incentivize water conservation and efficiency, and reuse and recycling, brackish water desalination, a lot of things, some of which are going on to our south in Texas to meet their long-term water needs, that we could explore and hopefully implement here. So I'm looking forward to chairing that group. Essentially what we're talking about is not necessarily curbing that demand, but curbing the demand for fresh water over the next 50 years. Instead, shifting our focus more to conservation, efficiency, and other water sources besides fresh water to meet our needs. Water quality and quantity monitoring. You can't manage what you don't know. We have had and enjoyed since the late 90s at the Water Resources Board a very comprehensive surface water quality monitoring program, but our appropriations to that program have declined even though the costs have risen over that time. So our ability to collect that data has eroded, and we have never had a comprehensive groundwater monitoring program in the state, even though, especially for western Oklahoma, but really statewide, that is just as significant of a resource to meet the long-term water needs and current water needs of our state. So the legislature took action, appropriated $1.5 million to the Water Resources Board to build back its surface water monitoring network and create for the first time ever a comprehensive groundwater monitoring program. So we will take our existing surface water monitoring program. You can see the monitoring sites listed there, 103 sites statewide, be able to add 5 to 10 new stream gauges, and more importantly have more frequent site visits and sample more parameters so that we can have a more robust collection of data on our stream water. Lake sites, and yes, Eufaula is part of that, as you can imagine. 130 major lakes across the state that we sample statewide, Again, more frequent visits, more parameter samples. This is where I started while I was finishing college at OSU in this program. So I know how cold that can be out on the water pulling samples, for example. But again, groundwater monitoring. So working with landowners across the state of Oklahoma, trying to potentially identify roughly 2,000 sites out of the 140,000 holes we've stuck in the ground across the state of Oklahoma to tap groundwater, to be able to, for the first time ever, talk about the quality, the trends, the quantity, up, down, declines, not in our groundwater resources across the state of Oklahoma. So very much looking forward to putting that into action. Legislature also took action on this fourth priority recommendation, so 4 of the 8, to get through essentially the backlog of aquifer yield studies and stream water allocation models. These are critical for us to be able, when we issue a permit, make sure we know that that is a quantity of water that will be there and that won't impact other water right holders, that sort of thing. And yet we have never had a dedicated appropriation from the legislature to do those studies that are necessary to make sure those huge decisions are based on sound data and science. So the legislature essentially took the $1.3 million a year we were getting to do the water plan and said use that. You said it, Water Resources Board, over the next 10 years you could get through that backlog of unstudied groundwater basins and stream water watersheds. We'll give you this money to chew through that backlog over the next 10 years. So 10 years from now we ought to be caught up and understand better the amount of water we have in our groundwater basins and streams to allocate out. So this shows you what we've got 9 stream systems completed. Those are in yellow over there, but still 42 stream systems essentially unstudied or modeled for our permitting process. And so obviously we still have a lot of work to do. Next, please. Groundwaters, we have 10 major basins unstudied, 9 major basins overdue. You can see in green the 20-year updates due there, so those have expired. And in sort of the tan color, the major basins that are unstudied. Suffice it to say, we have a lot of work to do still. We're working on the Rush Springs right now. We just launched the groundwater basin study on that and are just finishing up the Garber-Wellington groundwater basin study, which is a hugely important aquifer underlying the central Oklahoma area. Regional planning groups. This is the one, the 5th priority recommendation of the Comprehensive Water Plan. This was the most popular recommendation of those that participated in this water planning process. People across the state said, we want to be more involved in this water planning process. We think we know best what the priorities are in our area, how water ought to be managed and that sort of thing. And we ought to at least have a seat at the table instead of having these water plans and these water priorities set in Oklahoma City and then dictated to us. That's what regional planning groups are all about. Most of our neighboring states do them. There were more bills filed on this subject in the legislative session. Not one of them made it through at the end of the day because it was such a controversial subject. There were lots of arguments over how you draw the lines on these regional planning groups, how people get put on these regional planning groups. Should they be voted upon, elected? Should they be appointed? At the end of the day, what really I think killed it, at least for this session, is that some of the statewide organizations were concerned that if you divide the state up into any kind of region and give people a voice in that, it's going to create little fiefdoms where people are going to want to say, this is our water, we're not sharing it with anybody, and set us up for that sort of thing. Of course, there are a lot of folks that would love to do that, but at the end of the day, most of the states have regional planning groups. Not one of them allows those regions to totally control their water. They're simply for planning, priority setting, better communication with the state, making sure the state isn't doing a top-down approach to everything. In-stream environmental flows, number 6. This was obviously a hot topic, one that I was pleased to see actually elevated as one of the priority recommendations. Essentially, within the comprehensive water planning process, we created a in-stream flow work group. They developed a 100-plus page report, which you can download from our website as well. But the recommendation of that work group is that we do need to recognize that there are non-consumptive water needs out there to support recreation and fishing, hunting, canoeing, that kind of thing, and that our current water laws and regulations do an inadequate job of making sure that those needs are identified, met, protected long-term, and so we need to set about in this sort of 6-step process over the next couple of years, figuring out what kind of system do we need in Oklahoma, what will work with our existing appropriation system, and make sure that we've got those needs and protected into the future. I was able to just meet just yesterday with our contractors that we're getting some funding through the Corps of Engineers through a Planning Assistance to States grant to help us work on this effort, as well as the Water for 2060 Act. I was able to meet with contractors yesterday to sort of lay out. Hopefully we'll be pulling the work group back together over the next couple of months and launching out on the work associated with figuring that one out. Excess and surplus water, number 7, another popular subject. Statute, the same statute that tells the Water Resources Board to do comprehensive water planning, updated every 10 years, also says you should define and develop a procedure for calculating excess and surplus water in that comprehensive water plan to make sure that the area of origin, so the area where the water sits, is never made water deficient, but also at the same time allowing maximum development of that water. So as long as that area will not be water deficient, if there is water remaining, it should go to help other Oklahomans meet their water needs. Again, water in the West, the appropriation system. Water, it does not belong to whoever it is in their backyard. It belongs to everyone and should be utilized by everyone. That's the philosophy, that's the mentality, that's the legal system that developed in the West going back several hundred years. That's the legal system we have in place in Oklahoma right now, like it or not. So, for example, next, the Eufaula region, and you find this page 75 to 80, somewhere in there in the executive report, but also in each planning region report, you see what that translates into under our existing laws and regulatory system in the state of Oklahoma, although we, for the first time ever, did add some caveats to that. So under our existing laws and regulatory system, we look at water available on an average annual basis. We never have an average year, right? We have up years, we have down years, they all average out to this. Right now we're in some down years, 2 back to back, and we hope we're done. I can promise you that. But this basin, the Eufaula Basin, on an average annual basis, if you click on through these, there is 3,264,000 acre feet per year of water on an average annual basis that's available in this basin. Looking out over the next 50 years of need, that's existing permits, projected future demands for water in this area, and this also includes the amount of water necessary to produce the yields in the reservoirs, which is important to understand in Eufaula. So we set out water that is in existing permits, projected to be needed in the future, but also water needed to essentially fill the lakes in the basin, water needed to meet downstream needs and permits in the next downstream basin, water needed to fulfill our compact obligations. There are a number of things that get subtracted out in this category. You subtract that out. For the first time, the Water Resources Board said, you know, normally this would all be left for us to issue permits on under our existing system. But we may have gotten some of our math and projections wrong. So let's set aside 10%, let's add 10% fudge factor, if you will, to what we estimate to be the permitted needs over the next 50 years. Set that aside. Plus, let's take 10% of the overall water availability, set that aside, subtract that out, and say, once you've done that, there are still over 1.3 million acre feet of water available in the basin. Did I say that right to begin with? 3 million to
Yeah.
260, or did I say 1.3? Okay, I might have been thinking about the 1.3. So after all of that's subtracted out, still 1.3 million. You may recall going back, sort of to put that in perspective, statewide water use is under 2 million acre feet per year of water. So, you know, if you think about it in that, there may be, on an average annual basis, if you were to take the rest of the water out, you could almost meet the state of Oklahoma's entire water needs out of that one basin. But again, caveats, this additional set aside has never been done before, and for the first time recognizing that this excess and surplus water that we would be the maximum amount that we might be able to go permit for additional water use does not include federal, tribal reserved rights for water or in-stream flow requirements. What is necessary to maintain stream levels, lake levels, that sort of thing. Because again, if you remember the recommendation before, we don't have regulations on the books for addressing in-stream flows, lake levels per se, with a couple of exceptions and that sort of thing, which is something we obviously need to work on and get to work on quick. Lastly, but not leastly, state tribal water consultation and resolution. So one of the 8 priority recommendations was a recognition that tribes have claims to water across the state, and there are 39 federally recognized tribes, and we need to avoid future conflict, build cooperation. We're obviously engaged in conflict and litigation with a couple of the tribes right now, although we're engaged in mediation, and hopefully we'll get those issues worked out as well. But we need to preemptively work on these issues and get serious as a state legislature and governor and tribes, and make formal consultation a high priority. Let's get those claims resolved. It's very disruptive to an appropriation system when people need water rights that they can bank on. And so, what's next? So at the end of the day, we hope this is a plan for all Oklahomans. It won't be perfect for any one Oklahoman, individual Oklahoman, but hopefully it's a good plan for all. Hopefully we'll see increased unity, constructive solutions, more partnerships, of course, and then at the end of the day, making some tough choices. Change is hard. That we've had an appropriation system, groundwater, surface water on the books for since before statehood, back in the territorial days, and it has slowly evolved over time, obviously, and been tweaked and that sort of thing. But the people of Oklahoma that participated in this process said, we need to make some changes, and I identified some of those areas here, and so that will require some tough choices and some hard work, but certainly the folks at the Water Resources Board are willing to take those challenges on and do that hard work. And I know you've got some great senators, representatives, elected officials from this area, Representative Canaday and Condit, for example. Representative Reniger worked really hard on regional planning groups, took it on the chin a lot.